Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to Shadow Lord Iskar.
Yes, this is the hot potato boss where you're throwing around an eye of Anzu, which is on an extra action bar, lobbing it about between your raid members to make sure they don't die. So it's pretty much every raid leader's worst nightmare, and it is good fun though, but it requires a hell of a lot of coordination.
Now for this encounter you want to bring 2 tanks, about a healer a group, and you can bring almost any DPS composition you like. Now this boss consists of 2 phases, one where he is fighting you on the ground, and one where he'll fly away and you'll have to deal with adds. And he'll be swapping between these 2 phases at certain health percentages. Now each ground phase he has is exactly the same, and each air phase changes each time you go into it. To start off, we'll talk about the ground phases. For your raid team to worry about is something called Fel Chakram. This will mark 3 players in your raid team, and after a short while the boss will throw a chakram at one of them, which deals damage to anyone caught in its path, as well as dealing damage to the entire raid when the person is actually hit. The amount of damage that the raid actually takes is reduced the further away this target is from the raid. After it hits the first player, it will then travel to the second player, and then the third, and then it will just go straight back to the boss. The idea is that you have the entire raid stacked underneath the boss more or less, and then the people who get the chakrams just need to make sure that they move out as far away as they possibly can. An ability that can make this stacking slightly awkward though is something called Fel Incineration. The boss will place a debuff on a single player and a pillar of fire will come down and start chasing them, leaving pools of fire behind them. And the idea is if you get targeted by this, you just need to move away. The way that we do it is that every time a fire spawns, we just inch the boss further and further away and just get everyone to move up a little bit. It means that every time a fire spawns, everyone has to move, but it's just the safest way of doing it, and you need to keep the middle of the room completely clean. Now as Alex said at the start of the video, there's something that you need to throw around in order to deal with certain abilities. That's the Eye of Anzu. You pick that up right at the beginning of the encounter underneath the boss. If you don't pick it up, it will just pulse AoE damage on the raid, so make sure you pick it up immediately. Whoever does pick it up will start taking increasing ticking damage, and this ticking damage will only be removed once you throw it to a new player. And you throw the eye by using your extra action button while targeting a particular player.
Now you need to use this Eye of Anzu to counter some of the abilities that the boss has. One of these abilities is Phantasmal Winds. This will debuff multiple members in your raid and start pushing them off the side of the encounter area. At first the push isn't too much, but it just gets stronger and stronger and stronger. Now to remove this debuff, that player has to hold the Eye of Anzu. So the idea is that as soon as the Phantasmal Winds goes out, you start throwing the Eye of Anzu to each debuffed player in order to stop them from being pushed off the edge and, dying. Now some targets probably should take priority, such as tanks and healers, but overall just make sure you throw it quickly and you should be absolutely fine.
You can also use the eye to counter something called Phantasmal Wounds. This is just debuffs that are placed on random targets that make them just take ticking damage. However, you don't have to throw the eye to them, instead you can just heal them above 90%. So really it's probably a good idea not to throw them. Healers haven't got much else to do anyway, so just heal them up.
So there are the abilities the boss does during all of his ground phases, but once it reaches 70% HP he will fly up in the air, become immune to damage, and start his air phase. Now during this first air phase he will spawn 1 corrupted priest of xhul'horac and a bunch of illusionary outcasts. Now these outcasts don't have any abilities, they just melee hit the tanks, so just passively cleave them down. Now the corrupted priest only has one ability called Phantasmal Obliteration. This will place a bunch of phantasmal bombs on multiple members of your raid. After 5 seconds, all the bombs will explode, dealing large magic damage to anyone nearby. However, one of these phantasmal bombs will actually be a Fel bomb. This Fel bomb can only be seen by the player holding the Eye of Anzu, and it is dispellable. If you dispel this Fel bomb, it will cause all of the phantasmal bombs to harmlessly disappear. So when this ability comes in, have a healer hold the Eye of Anzu and get them to quickly dispel the Fel bomb. It's the only one that you can dispel. Just find the target that can be dispelled and quickly dispel them. This way nobody has to move or no one will explode, which is ace.
Now while you're dealing with the corrupted priest and all the other illusionary outcasts, the boss won't just be standing there doing absolutely nothing. He'll do something called Focus Blast. This is an ability that has a massive cast that just deals a load of damage in a beam direct to any player that's holding the Eye of Anzu. Now the amount of damage that this deals is lethal on a single target, however the damage received is split between everyone within the beam animation. So what you want to do is have your entire raid team just stacked in the middle so everyone gets hit by the beam. Note in this phase that the boss will also still cast the Fel Incineration, so you need to make sure that you move out of the middle immediately when this happens. After around 45 seconds or so, the phase will end and Iskar will return to the platform, and it's very important at this point that the priest is either dead or very close to dying, because you don't really want to be dealing with the bombs, as well as having to deal with like phantasmal winds and everything else, because they do come in almost immediately after you do transition.
Now once you got that all cleared up, you'll just be dealing the boss in his ground phase until you get to around 45%, where he'll then enter the second air phase. In this second air phase, you will be dealing with the adds from the previous air phase, which is the Corrupted Priest and his outcasts, but you'll also be dealing with a new add called the Shadowfell Warden. This guy will do something called Fel Conduit. This is a channel that will just pretty much deal chain lightning that just does higher and higher damage over time. However, this is interruptible, but only to the players holding the Eye of Anzu. Now, if you have two 14-second interrupts, you can easily cover this ability. Ideally, if you can get a healer with an interrupt, and then one other player to rotate who is holding the eye, this should make it so you should be able to interrupt each cast, while being able to dispel all the bombs that are coming in with the healer. In this phase, we have all of our DPS focus on removing the Warden first, before switching to the Priest afterwards. Now, after another 45 seconds, the boss will land again. The Warden should 100% be dead at this point, and the Priest, once again, should be very close to dying at this point as well. Make sure you finish them off, and continue with the boss's ground phase until he hits 20%, where the last flying phase will start.
Now, the last flying phase is the most challenging one. In this last phase, you won't have any of the little outcast adds, you don't need to worry about them anymore. However, you will still be fighting the Priest and the Fel Warden, but you'll also get a new mob called the Fel Raven. Now, how the Fel Raven works is that he'll put a debuff on your tank, which will cause the tank to take 100% extra fire damage for 10 seconds, as well as dealing huge AoE damage to himself and anyone nearby, and this damage stacks up. However, if the tank is holding the Eye of Anzu, the debuff will be removed or will not be applied at all. So ideally you want one tank to pick him up and make sure that the tank never receives that debuff, just by having him hold the Eye of Anzu pretty much the entire phase. The only time he wouldn't be holding it is when he needs to throw it to the healer so he can dispel the bombs, or if his interrupt is on cooldown and someone needs to interrupt the Fel Warden. But apart from that, in this phase you just want to pop Bloodlust, nuke the Raven off quickly so the tank doesn't have to hold it the entire phase, followed by the Fel Warden, and then lastly the Priest. As long as you focus your DPS on the adds in the correct order, this air phase shouldn't be too difficult. But do note, as soon as this phase ends, and the boss lands 45 seconds or so later, you will still have adds up. It's very unlikely that you killed all three of them during this phase, so you will need to throw the eye back to one of your healers so they can dispel the bombs, and it's very likely that healer will probably also need to interrupt the Fel Warden if he's still alive. And apart from that, you just finish the boss off for his last 20% in his last ground phase, and that's more or less it over.
Yeah, it's weird. It's kind of like this last air phase is like, oh, pop Bloodlust, do everything. Okay, we cleared up the ads. The last 15% of the boss is kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it's GG. As soon as you've made that transition back into the phase with all the ads dead and, well, the majority of your raid team alive, there's very few things that can sort of go wrong to this point, because by this point, you probably know how to deal with the phantasmal winds. You're probably very good at throwing around the eye.
Yeah.
So, yeah, after you've made that transition, it's a joke.
So thank you very much for watching, guys. If this guide did help you out, then make sure you give us a like. It helps us out a lot. And we'll see you in the next video.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you.